Hello everybody, Oopal's Cat. Just going to review this book, which I got from the university for $5.99 Canadian. Not bad. But first I just want to show you what we assume is the public face of Antifa in the prepping world.
So it wasn't working before?
Disco!
Who am I?
I don't. Who are good God? Who knows? Who are you?
I don't know.
Yes, that well-known member of the Black Bloc, Angry Prepper, is back as the Angry Chef, so sub him. Let's get him to 200 so he ditches his channel again. And it's nice to see Big Mama is still as technically proficient with the camera work as ever. This book was first published in 2004, and this is the second edition in 2012. And interesting enough, it's from that hotbed of Antifa, this great state of Oregon, published in Salem. And it is the official fall selection of the Department of Homeland Security Dangerous Book Club. It's kind of amusing, isn't it? They've got a fake quote from, well, not even probably a fake quote, from Janet Napolitano of the Department of Homeland Security. Describes in lurid detail how sensible law-abiding citizens can be transformed into mayhem-making mobs. Yes. And it's very much in the Idiot's Guide how-to style, lots of comedy in it, lots of interesting little ideas, lots of ideas in here. Encourages you to write into the margins and actually gives you examples of writing into the margins. There is a temptation just to look at Antifa, and I must admit I'm guilty of this, as a daft organisation of a few blowhard commies hanging out in universities who don't have jobs and or lives. And certainly the idea that 92% of them live in their parents' basements, they wouldn't get that statistic, but it's actually probably true that a lot of them are not living formalised lives within current society. They don't actually have jobs, they don't actually have fixed homes. They're essentially homeless and definitely home insecure. And that makes them very mobile. And it is very tempting to take a book like this and laugh at it. But I do think there's some stuff in here that we should be taking as warnings, but I also think there's some stuff in here that actually could help our prepping. So, stay tuned, let's go for this. And if you missed I got some attempts of it at the end. I'm just not up to the meow today. The disclaimer's pretty much funny, and it's meant to be humorous. It says, many of the recipes we composed for this volume were test-driven in small towns. We selected such locations for our rigorous process of experimentation and analysis on the grounds that they were utterly unremarkable. And I do think that's worth bearing in mind. The university towns specifically, the small university and college towns, you might want to make sure that you are aware of any Antifa activity in the area, because they will pose a significant threat to you in grid down. And if you are on the right wing and you don't like Muslims or people of colour or gay people, and you've been pretty public about that and have joined organisations that actually are trying to eradicate or remove them from the United States of America or Canada, you might want to consider home security, because they're probably aware of you and they're probably going to come after you. So this is the table of contents. You can see with the nifty metrosexual pink highlighter the ones I'm actually going to focus on, and sit back and let's focus on them. One of the first things they do, like all extremist organisations, is that they decide to redefine the terms, and that's some extremist organisations are actually able to pinpoint them by this. Anti-racist action, US and Canada, anti-fascist action, UK, and the German Antifa movement. So Antifa, strictly speaking, is a German organisation. The American and Canadian versions that you're experiencing are the Anti-Racist Action, or the ARA. It then lists some anti-fascist organisations that they claim are not anti-fascist. The Jewish Defence League, the Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Centre. They don't like them. So some of the ideas are laughable. For example, you can pose as an injured or handicapped person in order to get crutches through the police checkpoints to be used as weapons later. Imagine the bad press authorities would risk by attempting to confiscate them. I don't think the press would have a bad press at all. When you're confronted with scenes like this, I think the police are going to not allow people who are disabled into the area for a period and just tell them it's unsafe. And in America, they'll just not let them in, because they don't really have freedom over there. Diversity is a big thing for these guys and girls and unidentifieds. They talk about how to actually make semi-permanent tile markings into asphalt to put subversive messages there. They talk about doing banner drops both on buildings and inside malls and how to do it, and the actual technicalities of how to do this sort of stuff, including the knots, but their knot skills are not up to prepper standards. Some of this stuff though is actually kind of amusing. They have a behavioural cut-ups section which is talking about how to make yourself more alive and more open to anti-fascist action, I guess. This will amuse people. Become vegan. Focuses your attention on food, transforming social interactions and often resulting in increased interest in cooking or gardening. Indeed, I would argue that eco-awareness and climate change action actually puts you at risk, if you want to look at it in those terms, of actually joining Antifa, which I'm going to call them, even though it's just the German organisation. Now this is useful, this stuff is useful. Make 2 lists, things that bore you and things that are terrifying to you. The former should be easy to compile, while the latter might be difficult even to admit to yourself. Randomly select an item from each list. Invent a practice that combines them. For example, if you pick commuting from your boring list and public speaking from your frightening list, you might dare yourself to deliver an oration every morning on the subway. And they suggest keeping a journal of the experience. What this is doing is actually a good, useful life skill. It actually helps you become more human and more aware in the now. But what it also does is allows you to become increasingly radicalized. Bicycles are a big thing in this book, and they talk about how to organise bicycle parades, which is basically sealing off roads to car traffic using bikes, how to paint on asphalt from bikes, and how to use bikes to give intelligence and protect yourself from police action in crowds and mob activity, and also whilst undertaking vandalism. Yeah, and I agree. I think bicycles are a really underused tool in a lot of the prepping world, and get a bike and get on it. Now, they also talk about making a record player from a bicycle, which is kind of fun. I hadn't thought about this. Yeah, so some of this stuff is useful, right? Talk about using public space to put on media and also to change advertising to get across subversive messages wherever possible. They talk about how to do this, the risks of it, how to turn off power supply to lighting and stuff like that to get the message across. And as you can see, this is just some examples of what they've been up to. These are not great examples. The book has better ones. The first one is just a very basic attack. The second one is using the white space of advertising to tell people to get lost. They don't like attacks on women via any medium at all. This is an example of a brilliant one, Nike dripping blood, which is fairly relevant, I guess. This is also a clever one, and they talk in the book in detail about how to actually do this type of advertising defacement. I think it's a very interesting way that they did it here, and I think it's probably great. They also are very political. They do not support Israel, I believe, and they are not supporting Palestine as openly as people support Israel, so it's all a bit convoluted, but they are active. They do things like putting flyers on top of newspapers in newspaper bins to put out a different type of a message, and they will actually organise rallies and things like that, and they will alert people in the area if racists are in the area, in their opinion. So what they do is they will actually use different forms of alert and media knowledge to get people aware, depending on how much violence they're intending to do. If they're intending to do extreme violence, they don't make any public announcements, they don't try and find anybody else, they just use their original core group, their affinity group, as they would call it. If they want to have a meeting and if they want to have other people involved, but they will advertise in certain ways and certain levels of that to get a certain number of people involved. But overall, the extreme acts of violence, they try and fly them under the radar. If they know there's an anti-type fascist demonstration going off, they will try to infiltrate the crowd and then try to repurpose the crowd into ways that they deem to be more active in acting against racism and consumerism. They do liken in the book the Black Bloc to the Boston Tea Party. But they also conveniently note that the Boston Tea Party was not very well done because they are actually taking the mick out of First Nations, which I think is kind of amusing in a way. But they are right. If you want to be subversive and conduct illegal activity, hiding yourself in plain sight within a large group of people makes it very difficult for the police to act. We talk at length about how to reinforce petitions and bollards and poles, and how to secrete weapons in an area they're intending to cause rioting in quite detail, which obviously is like whatever, but the odd thing does slip through their net, and their net, I think in this case, was trying not to be too open about what they're up to. But this sort of thing kind of shows what they're actually up to. This is not a great recipe, by the way, for making a Molotov cocktail, and it would involve quite considerable danger to you to actually make a Molotov cocktail like that. But that's all I'm saying about it. But I do think putting polystyrene into the Molotov cocktail is actually an interesting idea, and they're doing that specifically. So the inflammable gasoline, they're just using gasoline, which again is not a great idea, would stick to policemen, and they're quite open about that. They want to kill police. They see the police as enforcing a fascist state and a consumerist state that's killing the planet. And yeah. Like I said in the previous video, a lot of these groups are not sustainable in the long haul. They don't have farms. Although they talk at length about farming collectives and stuff like that, they don't have the experience, nor the land, nor the knowledge. So it's no surprise they're living out in cities and stealing from dumpsters. And there's a dumpster diving section. Now if you're interested in dumpster diving, there's a whole bunch of resources out there, including Prepper Princess's great video, where she shows how to dumpster dive in expensive restaurants whilst inside the restaurant and eating. However, that aside, that was a little joke. This is actually a useful way of actually getting around to dumpster diving. So they say, who's wasteful in your town? Well, anybody that has a dumpster is wasteful, so any dumpster's fair game. So they talk about figuring out when loads are coming in to figure out what's in the dumpster. They talk about going into the store and damaging stuff you want, marking and scratching it so it will be thrown out in the dumpster so you can get it for free. They say it's better than shoplifting, and they also promote shoplifting in this. One of the great things I think is wonderful is this. They talk about not just using open, closed dumpsters, but going to colleges in April, and when all the students are leaving, and they say that there's so much stuff thrown out there that they can repurpose and use and resell or whatever for their cause, that you should go there. So the dumpster diving section is somewhat interesting, and I do think you should do it. Now one of the bad things about this, if you own a shop, is they say that when people put rat poison out and try and trash the food that they're putting out in the dumpsters so dumpster divers can't get it, one of the things that you should do is maybe super glue the locks, cut the locks off, put new locks on. Anything that impedes and offends and causes cost to members of the capitalist society, whether tiny little capitalists or huge capitalists, they're in absolute favour for. They also talk about repurposing some of the food and setting up free collectives to hand out food in poor areas to people. Again, they're doing that specifically because they think that's the moral thing to do, but more so because they're looking for it as ways of actually gathering support. Now they do have an evasion section because they do expect to get chased by and arrested by the police, and it's always an interesting thing to read this sort of stuff. It's not military tactics whatsoever particularly, it's just something they've figured out and learned. Know the area, know the escape routes, have lookouts, have signals that are obvious that you are going to get counted out. All of the obvious things are in here. One of the things I think is interesting is they are again promoting use of bicycles. Make sure that you hide them and that they can be abandoned in an emergency, so you can use bikes to escape. They talk about never panicking when found, but to walk directly and be calm. They also talk about if you have to split up your group to have relocation points later on, which is always smart and sensible. They talk about if in doubt, turn around and walk towards the police and ask them what's going on. They talk about it in a little bit of detail, and it's somewhat relevant. They talk about creating or joining current festivals to hand out literature and subversive messages. They talk about using graffiti a lot. A lot of these people are into graffiti. I think graffiti is just ugly, but that's just my personal opinion. But as you can see from this, they actually talk about how to make paint bombs and use Nerf guns to actually dump loads of paint on people and objects that you don't like, which isn't cool. One of the cool things is they talk about going to your local municipal dangerous goods recycling depot and asking if you can take some paint away, or just taking the paint. In other words, figuring out where you can get free paint from, where you can get free wood from, free nails from. Most of these people are not employed, so they have an awful lot of time on their hands. So some of their ideas could help you out in the now. If you are actually looking for paint and you don't really care too much about the colour, paint's expensive and it's also a good idea to reuse stuff. Maybe go to the municipal dump on a quiet afternoon and just say, hey, is it okay? I've got something to dump and take some old paint. Then look around what's there and say, hey, is it okay if I take these couple of paint tins away? I want to use them on my van. Frankly, kids, if you're in Antifa, the healthcare section, absolute twaddle. All about herbs. Herbs won't work to save you most of the time. But if you're actually resorting to doing your own cervical examination, and it gives you great detail about how to do this, you might want to consider it otherwise. However, tucked at the back of this is how to use limes and lemons and how to actually prepare your own body for experiencing tear gas attacks from the police, and also what the effects of the tear gas will be. This stuff's useful. For example, if you're in a downtown core area and you can't get out and you think there's going to be a riot going on that day or the next, don't shave for about a day in advance. Shaving opens the pores and makes chemical weapons more effective. That's useful knowledge. They talk about washing yourself and all your clothes in fragrance-free, non-oil based soaps. This gets rid of dead skin and the oils in you and your clothing, which helps prevent chemical weapons from sticking and causing more pain. So yeah, don't shave for about 24 hours and then wash yourself with a very neutral soap all over. And yeah, wearing waterproof outer garments with tight cuffs and collars and using synthetic fibres, not wools. All this stuff's good. But what do you do if you do get hit by a tear gas attack? Blow your nose, rinse out your mouth, cough, spit, but do not swallow or rub or touch. I would say touch the eyes. If you're wearing contacts, try to remove them or get somebody to remove them for you. They say the pain of tear gas attack peaks in about 15 minutes and then starts to fade over a few hours. You can reinfect yourself with tear gas as well, so try not to touch anything and then get rid of all your clothing and wash it twice. Good point about this. Tear gas canisters are often hot enough to burn people and actually powerful enough to hurt you. And one of the interesting things I found was that tear gas is actually invisible. So the police are often mixing it with powder to make the white clouds that we're used to seeing, or the yellow clouds, because they use that as an intimidation tactic, whereas actual tear gas itself is invisible. And they always say don't walk, don't run, be very careful because the panic can cause trampling issues. And they also talk about decontamination and all the rest of it and what you should be doing, which I think is kind of fun. Good foods to eat after contamination include miso, whole grains, brown rice and citrus foods. All organic, of course. Yeah, these are vegans. So it tells you how to hitchhike, but there's also a whole section on infiltrating right-wing groups to find out information about who there's in it and where they live and where their children live and all that stuff. These guys are pretty keen to know. One of the things I think is interesting, it tells you how to actually phone up and join and get involved in right-wing organisations, and I'm not going to go into it too much, but I just want to say that it is worth thinking about. It is worth thinking about if you are in any way at all a target in the modern world because of your political views or the groups you're a member of. You might want to look at some of this stuff, because this is how extreme left-wing will use tactics to actually get inside your organisation and find out details of you. Now I would also say the best thing to do is, if you are really extreme, either left or right, is to get out of that organisation and become a nice person. Quelle surprise, there's a large section on what to do if arrested, what to do if jailed, and how to get legal advice. So there you can see a legal flowchart that they've come up with, how to deal with legal issues that you may face as a member of the Anti-Fascist Alliance. So for me, one of the sections of the book that made it well worth the $5.99 Canadian is the musical instruments section. They talk about how to make mechanical, non-electrical musical instruments. They also talk about how to make rotary phones that are musical instruments, which I think was kind of interesting. If you can find a rotary phone, you're probably better off selling it and getting the money for that. In prepping style, there is a section on how to build a rocket stove. It's quite complicated compared to the normal methods you'll see. This is designed to be a long-lasting rocket stove, not the usual couple of tins and lamp hammered together. And yeah, it has to be an interesting project if you needed one. I do not need a rocket stove, but if you do, not a bad project to make. There is a section on Sabotage with a detailed first-person narrative of how they got into a company and caused considerable damage. And it ends with, the action was a success, but I'm only able to tell you this story because I made a mistake that resulted in my being convicted. Luckily, it only cost me 4 years of freedom. Federal agents may not be that smart, but they are patient, waiting for yourselves one fatal error. Don't be discouraged, our enemies still have weaknesses, and even the most fortified target has its weak link. Find it, break it, and continue forward. Yeah. Any fixed target is going to be vulnerable to an enemy patient and aggressive enough to want to wait you out. And I think that's a key message from this book, is that whether you are left or right wing, whether you support fascism or support communism, it's kind of an irrelevancy. At some point, if you go too extreme in politics, you're going to end up doing things that don't make any much logical sense on either side of the political spectrum. I would say one of the best things I've ever read on security for groups and group membership for subversive cell groups is actually this section. It's an awful long section, and I was going to read it all, and I'm not going to. I think if you are interested in security of groups and you are concerned about either other groups or policing or OPSEC in times of grid down, this section is absolutely phenomenal. It very much lays out lines of communication, when you talk, when you don't talk, how you deal with security issues, and I think it's absolutely wonderful. For example, security culture is not a paranoia institutionalized, but it's a way to avoid unhealthy paranoia by minimizing the risks ahead of time. They very much here are in favor of security culture. Security is all the time, wherever they are, however they're doing stuff, and they don't want to worry too much about what they're doing in terms of security because they have it all laid up in advance in huge detail. This is a very, 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 very big section. I think it's interesting. So it gives levels of security, right? So there's these 5 levels of security, 7 levels of security. So security level 1 would be the planning to firebomb an SUV dealership. Only those directly involved would know of the action. After the action, no one talks again about the action. You're very careful with the action. You don't publicise the action during or after. Whereas level 2 would be acceptable for planning minor acts of property destruction such as spray painting. So 2 is trusted support persons who know about the action, or everyone in the group decides together who these will be. And goes down to level 7, which the action is totally announced and above ground in all ways. Great. So they also quote Abby Hoffman, described as the first duty of the revolutionary is not getting caught. And I would agree with that. If you are going to be a revolutionary, don't be caught. But I would say if you are being a revolutionary, you are actually overthrowing current society or trying to. What would come afterwards is interesting, but what are you going to make sure during the fall about pain and suffering and hardship for the majority of people in the population? These revolutionaries on left and right sides tend to forget about the pain they're going to inflict and the death and suffering they're going to inflict. If you want to go shoplifting or if you want to make your own smoke bombs, this will tell you in detail, using real-world experience, how to go about those 2 activities, neither of which Hoople's cat condones. Scattered amongst the book is the crazy, the amusing, and the downright useful. In the section on unemployment, there's some useful tips here if you're ever unemployed or you want to be frugal. I think this is a great tip. You can register for classes at the local community or 4-year college to get a legitimate student ID, and then cancel directly thereafter to receive a full refund on the tuition you've paid. With your brand new ID card, you can take full use of the school's facilities and perhaps even ride the local buses for free. Well, you're not going to ride local buses for free in Canada with a student ID, but what you can do is you can go to sports centres inside the universities and swim and play games. You can use the university libraries to a large degree, and if you follow some of their tips and actually get a little bit more illegal about the whole thing, you can actually get access to a college's or a university's internet server system, so you actually have email and can log into their servers and run riot using the interweb fairly anonymously. So the book ends like all things revolutionary with a statement that is just silly. When the world ends, people come out of their apartments and meet their neighbours for the first time. They share food, stories, companionship. No one has to go to work or the laundromat. No one remembers to check the mirror or scale or email account before leaving the house. Of course, these days people check email after they've left the house all the time, continually. Graffiti artists surge into the streets because they've got nothing better to do, I guess. Strangers embrace, sobbing and laughing. Every moment possesses an immediacy formally spread out across months. Burdens fall away, people confess secrets and grant forgiveness. The stars come out all over New York City. And 9 months later, a new generation is born. Yeah, but if you don't keep sanitation going, there will be a lot of deaths from water. So that's it for me. If you can get hold of a copy of this for $5.99 Canadian, I would do so. It's actually an interesting read, it's kind of a fun read, it's a sort of a prepping book, it's a sort of subversive military OPSEC book, it's a sort of left-wing crazy book. It's fun, I'm glad I got it. Now I will end with this statement from them. This is their end piece of the book, and again I think this is always interesting to see what people are doing. Being a martyred slave of routine is not something I plan to do with my life, but at the same time I don't necessarily agree. You have to smash the fascist state that all around you allows you to organise and live to smash it, which makes it not that effective, does it? But there you go. So remember, in SHTF, tomorrow will always be worse than today, unless you prep. And part of prepping is to know what people of a different political persuasion for you are planning to do in SHTF. Not just guessing what they're prepared to do, or watching endless rubbish videos on YouTube about Antifa coming to kill us. Be realistic, be rational, be calm. Gather information from wherever you can gather it that's going to give you an advantage, a competitive advantage in SHTF, so you can survive and your family can survive and you can be a good person in the community that's around you. Not a force of death, mayhem and destruction. You can pretend that you're fighting the forces of fascism, you can pretend you're fighting the forces of anti-freedom, you can pretend you're defending your country's borders against external threats. It's all nonsense. What you're doing is you're becoming an extremist and you're harming people. Mostly you're harming yourselves. Doodles!
It's time to wake up, it's time to stand up. It's time to step outside. It's time to decide, oh, it's time to find out if we're gonna live or die.